Peace be with you. It's our natural response, right? You can catch a Lutheran off guard anytime by just saying those words. And the response is always the same. We're so comfortable with it. We're such a habit for us and such a staple in our service. It's become, though, something that we kind of take for granted. It's something that is habitual. It's instinctual. But there's a far deeper meaning to it. It's actually one of the earliest traditions in the Christian church. It's from the very beginning days of Christian worship. Nowadays, when we share the peace, we shake hands with the person next to us, and then we make our way in a circle immediately around us, and if we're really comfortable, we might hug somebody if we're related. And, you know, it has become the equivalent of kind of good morning to the people that are around you. But it is such a deeper history there. You know, the early church, the early Christian church, operated very much as a commune. When people joined the community, they gave up all of their possessions, and they shared all things in common. They lived together. They worked together. They ate and drank together. They did everything in community with one another. And as you can imagine, when you have a group of people who are in tight quarters like that, spending all of their time and all of their days together, they got on each other's nerves sometimes. Arguments sometimes would come up. Disagreements and disputes would happen. So during the week, the community would build up different problems between one and another. And then they would come for worship, to gather around to share communion together. But the belief was that you couldn't receive communion unless you had made amends with all of those that you had disagreements with in that prior week. So when it was time to share the peace, it wasn't about just shaking hands with a couple people around you. Bob would go over to Harry, and they would hash out whatever problem they had had. And until they did, they couldn't come up to receive communion. So instead of just handshaking around, it was groups of people settling their differences first, so that they could then come together in worship as one family, at peace with one another. That's the peace that originally was intended. Imagine if we took it to that extreme today for us. Imagine if sharing the peace really was settling our grudges. Because, no, we don't all live together, and we don't all work together, and we have our separate lives, but I can tell you after a year, we still have disagreements with one another, and we still get on one another's nerves sometimes. Imagine if we really took that to heart, and we would settle our hard feelings, and settle all of our grudges before coming before the altar. Not just with people in this community, even, but all of those grudges and hurts and disagreements that we carry in with us from our outside lives. Imagine the real peace that you would have in your heart to know that you had settled all of your disagreements before coming here. Then peace really would be with you. But you know, it's not just about grudges. Zechariah talks about peace also in our first reading. Zechariah, incidentally, was not much older than Lily when he was preaching. He was a young man, maybe 10, 11 years old, whose father had died at an early age. His grandfather had raised him. Zechariah is known as a restoration prophet. And that means he preached at a time at the end of the Babylonian exile. If you don't know anything about the Babylonian exile, it's one of the darkest periods of time in Jewish history, and that's saying something. It was a time where their entire race was threatened to be extinct, threatened to be wiped out completely. They had been pulled from their homeland, taken into slavery, and scattered. And just as they were about to be wiped out, the Israelites believed that God had abandoned them, that God had forgotten about them, and that they were ultimately doomed as a people. But it turns out that they're rescued. They're freed from their captivity, and they're able to return back to Jerusalem. Zechariah is preaching at a time when they're about to rebuild the temple in the center of Jerusalem. Their hope has been restored. They're reminded that God will always rescue them, no matter how bad things are, no matter how terrible things seem to be, that God always comes through in the end. And God conquers like a conquering military hero. And as he walks into the city, he's not riding on a war horse. He's not covered in armor and weaponry. What's he riding? A donkey. Sound familiar, by the way? Rides in on a donkey, which is a symbol of peace. It's a symbol of the end of all violence and the end of military aggression. It shows a new era for the Jewish people. An ultimate peace. Imagine if we had that peace when we came home. Because we do live in a dangerous world. And I'm talking about physical violence with terrorism and war and muggers and criminals that are out there. But not just that, we live in a turbulent time that can be upsetting, that can drag us down, that can leave us hopeless. But what if we came here looking for peace in this sanctuary? A sanctuary, a break from the outside world and all of the hatred and violence and ugliness that can be in it. When I was in seminary, one of my professors, he'd be so angry right now if he saw me because I have a wristwatch on. And he hated the idea of having a watch on when you were in worship. Because this was supposed to be a time to him where you were disconnected from the rest of the world. The church in Seattle, I use this illustration all the time, so I apologize for repeating it. But the church in Seattle used to keep a bucket out in their narthex for people to drop their cell phones in as they were walking into church. The initial reason was they were tired of people's ringers going on and interrupting the service. So it was kind of a half joke for people to do it in the beginning. But the parishioners loved it. And they kept the bucket there because they reported back to the pastor that for the first time in their week, nobody could reach them. No one could call them, email them, text message them. They were finally disconnected, if only for an hour out of the week, where they could just be with God. Imagine that peace that we would share, of being able to put aside all of the cares of the world out there. Then we really would find peace. Jesus speaks of peace also in our gospel message for today. And he's speaking to a group of people that know anything but peace in their lives. He's speaking to the poor, to the afflicted, to those who struggle in every aspect of their daily lives. He's speaking to them that he can help them. He can give them rest. He can guide them through the most difficult times. Imagine if we had that kind of peace. Because all of us have those burdens. All of us have those distractions in our life. Worried about money. Worried about our jobs. Worried about our kids. All of those worries that we carry with us each and every day. Imagine if we could check those at the door, just like our cell phones or our wristwatches, and come here and be strengthened. To be able to have the strength to go back into what can be a difficult world out there. Knowing that Jesus will always be with us. That Jesus will always care for us. Imagine if we really held on to that commission of Jesus, that we be the ones to help one another through difficult times. That we be the ones to share one another's burdens, to build one another up. Imagine if we shared that kind of support, that kind of care, that kind of encouragement and inspiration, all one with another, to help us through our difficult times, to get us through what can be a challenging world, what can be challenging relationships. Imagine the true peace that would be with us then. Amen.